Abusia for me channel Mr. So mo akwa by channel so ha either so I be media judge. Abusia Felix Ofosu Kwakye. Yes. Felix Ofosu Kwakye. Abusia ene wadi nkomo e de afa NPP top appointees ho a say allegedly say omo ensem akoye say corruption na dokro mo. Abusia ene Felix Ofosu Kwakye honorable waka nsem wa o say o de nsem e de aba. Obi beka say truth finally out and I say evidence aba abusia we dey ma make some say upon 80 place of Ofosu Kwakye nsem a all the art to dem say ha either so I be media gicham so be say any dey connect channel so be say obe subscribe e dey my notification bell for podcast updates abusia anything come about say
the one city say take it off. Now what's been the assessment of this situation over the last 4 weeks by government?
I think the president made it clear in the submissions during the encounter with civil society that government is considering all options on the table and that when it deems it necessary, the right decisions will be made. Sometime next week, there will be a cabinet session. All of these matters will be tabled for discussion and the appropriate decisions will be taken. What happens is that since time immemorial, we've all known that petroleum pricing has been contingent on 3 factors. The first one is the price of the commodity, which we do not control as a country. The second one is the taxes and levies that government imposes on the product, which we control. I mean, the government controls. And then there is the exchange rate at which the product is imported, which government also should have control of because government has responsibility to manage the exchange rate. Now, a movement in any of these 3 can affect the price at the pump. And so often when we come to analyze this, we see which of the factors is accounting for either a drop or an increase in pricing. And this has not changed. But before I even delve further, it is imperative to remind Richard that you see, criticism of government on fuel prices did not start in the tenure of the NPP. We all were in this country in 2016, 2015, 2014. Their current flag bearer, who was vice president and head of the government economic management team, when they were campaigning in opposition, even in normal times, when there were marginal increases to reflect the existing deregulation arrangements, he took on government. So, for instance, in May 2015, the price of fuel at the pump was 3 cedis 50 pesos. Yet, Dr. Baumia found reason to call the government of the day insensitive for pricing fuel at 3 cedis 50 pesos. So, when you come to power, and at a point, the price of fuel goes to 23 cedis, certainly you will come in for flag. So, it is a natural consequence of the sharp increase which created huge difficulty for the people of Ghana. And therefore, there was no way that the MPP was going to escape scrutiny for taking things that far. Now, it's also important to assess what has happened. When we came to power, fuel was so likely to have the export prices of Goa. Goa. We can use Goa because it's state-owned. If you use a private entity, you may accuse them of profiteering or rent-seeking. But let us use Goa, whose objectives go beyond profit-making because they are a state entity. Now, fuel price sold, that is for petrol, it was 13 cedis, roughly the same, around the same figure that the product was selling for a week or 2 ago. And then for diesel, it was 16 cedis. That is what we came to meet. And those were normal times. Those were normal times. There was no crisis. So the price of crude oil was within manageable limits. Now, since we've been in power, one of the 2 things that government controls, which is the exchange rate, has been so well managed that it moved from around 17 cedis, and that is the price at which the importers were importing the product. It was between 16 to 17 cedis to $1.
In fact, they at that time they had their own rates.
Yeah,
They had their own rates that they go.
They was around
Their rate is
16.
a little
They
higher.
don't use
Yes,
the indicative rate, but they use what is on the market.
Yes.
No. Maybe he can clarify. But it was within that range. Yeah.
Clarify that for us. What rates do you use? Because I know there's some buffer that.
So in the previous regime, we used to have what we call the auction. The auction rate was normally the Bank of Ghana rate that which which gave us 20% of what you require to import, and then the remaining 80% you source from the commercial bank.
Exactly. So it meant that their rate was higher than what the Bank of Ghana was, because if they get the rest from the commercial bank, the commercial banks will put a marker on the Bank of Ghana rate. So I think that is clear. Now we brought it down to a level where it affected the prices at the pump. So, Alfred, for about 10, 11, 12 months, the price of fuel at the pump consistently reduced and gave significant relief to the people of Ghana. Indeed, you mentioned that at some point, the oil marketing companies were engaged in price wars because they were selling fuel under 9 cedis. That was a direct consequence of proper management of one of the factors that affect fuel prices. Sometimes, I think on 3 or 4 occasions, there were marginal increases when there were some shifts on the world market in terms of the pricing of crude oil. So everybody attests that we put in better management of the petroleum sector than we came to inherit. So the price at which it was selling for right before this conflict began was much lower than what we inherited. That was not the case under the NPP. Indeed, by the time the Russia-Ukraine crisis struck, fuel prices were hovering around 6 cedis a litre at the pump. Meanwhile, they came to meet it under 4 cedis. And that was because some of the factors, like exchange rate, had begun to deteriorate. Indeed, today, fuel price is being sold close to what we came to meet, despite the existence of this conflict, which you yourself attest has upset the market. In fact, when the Russia-Ukraine conflict broke out in February of 2022, crude oil prices were selling just under $100 at the time. The exchange rate was around 6 cedis. It had moved from around 4 cedis to 6 cedis by the time the Russian-Ukraine conflict arose. But Alfred, this peaked in August at $137 a barrel. That was the highest it went to. So fuel prices went to around 12, 13 cedis a litre. This is August 2022. Now, after that high point, the price of crude oil on the market began to drop. It dropped so much that by November 2022, crude oil prices were selling at $86.5 per barrel. So you would have expected a corresponding steep decline because it had moved from 137. So if the thing was selling us at 12, 13 cedis at the pump, when the thing was $137 a barrel, you would expect that once it goes down to $86 a barrel, then the price at the pump in Ghana would also reduce significantly. But Alfred, by that time, their economic mismanagement, which had destroyed the economy, had kicked in. The currency depreciated from 6 cedis in July of 2022 to 17 cedis by November 2022. So that led to a sharp rise in the price at the pump. When the world market price of crude oil was falling, it went to 23 cedis a litre for diesel and around 17 cedis, 18 cedis for petrol. So that was when we said that they cannot blame the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Because if it was a conflict alone that was accounting for the problem, the price of crude oil will fall. But the price of crude oil fell. But the price of fuel at the pump went to their highest levels in the history of Ghana at a time when the market price had dropped. And why was that the reason? And why was that? It was because they had mismanaged the economy and the currency had virtually been destroyed. That is not the case today. Alfred, in addition to the destruction of the cedi, you have listed a number of taxes. So you need to look at the taxation behavior of the government at the time to see whether it had impact on the price of fuel. It is true that we have imposed the energy fund levy. And the reason for that has been clear. And let me clarify. that when they were in power, there was a fiat by President Akufo-Addo that they should not include the price of liquid fuel in fixing the price, and that in fixing electricity prices, and that government will absorb the cost. So in other words, government was going to subsidize it. They didn't pay. So it racked up huge debt. So it was necessary to address it. And if you listen to the finance minister carefully when he went to parliament to introduce this levy, he said that this levy would generate roughly half what we needed to import oil to fire our thermal plants. Because if he imposed all of that on electricity, to go up too much. So part of it will be absorbed at the pump, and part of it will go onto electricity price. That's why you had the increase we had last year. In accordance with the automatic price adjustment that they agreed with the IMF. They were not including fuel in the pricing, but we had to include it. That is why electricity price went up. So when they argue that, oh, we were not affected by automatic pricing because crude oil prices were falling, that is simply not true. But back to petroleum prices. After, between 2018 and 2024, they increased certain levies significantly. For instance, when they came to power, they increased ESLA by 20% in 2018. And once you increase ESLA, automatically it will reflect in an increase at the pump. Again, they increased the bust margin by 300%. They increased the primary distribution margin by 247%. Then they increased the fuel marking margin by 350%. And then the Unified Petroleum Price Fund, UPPF, they increased it by 429%. So after, if you do this, naturally, the price at the pump is going to increase. So when you add these increases in the levies that they did to the steep depreciation of the currency from 6 cedis in July to 17 cedis in November, you are going to have an increase, the sharp increase you recorded at the pump in November 2022, even though the price of crude oil had fallen to 86% by that time. So it was not the Russia-Ukraine war that was creating the problem. The problem was the factors that government controlled that it had lost complete control of. And the reason why today you find that the price of crude oil is at, I think, $110 a barrel. You yourself have said it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's it.
Which is higher than it was in November 2022. But the prices are lower than the prices that they were selling at in November 2022. The reason is that we have controlled the currency. That is why it was absolutely imperative for the Bank of Ghana to do what they did to stabilize the currency. Otherwise, by now, I'm sure fuel will be selling at 30 cedis per liter because of what is happening in Russia and Ukraine. And everybody
you mean in
attests,
Israel?
in Israel and between Israel, the US, and Iran. Everybody attests that the part of the pricing factors that government should control has been handled. So it is clear beyond doubt that it is only this conflict that is contributing to this current upset. In their time, that was not the case. And that was the basis of the criticism. Let me also indicate that as of November 2024, the price of crude oil per ton, metric ton, was $667. Before this war, it rose slightly to $695 per metric ton. Indeed, if it had remained there, we wouldn't have seen any significant increase at the pump. As I speak to you, it is 1,432 per metric ton, which is twice what we inherited. And indeed, I remember my friend here reiterating the last time he was on this program about 3-4 weeks ago, that even insurance for freight has moved from $60,000, is it per cargo, to $1.6 million. So they add that to their margins.
So that the cost of insurance.
The cost of insurance because of the conflict and the risk of transporting crude oil through the Straits of Hormuz, the insurance companies have upped their premiums.
From $60,000.
$60,000 per cargo.
That's $60,000.
To $1.6 million per cargo.
Within which period did this happen? Just a quick one. Yes.
Since the war started, other insurance companies, Lloyd's and the rest, even decided that cargoes heading to Australia and others, they won't touch it.
Yes. So you see clearly
those coming here, and in addition to that, the normal demurrages that we experience, that is around, let's say, 30,000 to 50,000 a day. As we are speaking, they are quoting $120,000 a day. So if you are bringing a vessel to the WAF region and you cannot guarantee that it's berthing to discharge so that they can go, you are likely to experience that. So from April ending to May, that is how.
So the cost of insurance has shot up from 60,000 to
1.7 million.
$1.7 million. $60,000 to $1.7 million. That's huge. Let me quickly acknowledge and
yes.
so,
So yes.
You're
so,
going to go on, but let me
yes.
just.
Okay.
Professor Ramsford Jampo is in the studio, the CEO of the Ghana Shippers Authority and the Professor of Political Science. Prof, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Morning.
Perfect.
Thanks for having me, and greetings to my colleagues here.
Wonderful. Yes.
So, Alfred, there's no dispute what the facts are. So, unlike under them, when they could legitimately be faulted and blamed for the sharp increases in fuel prices, as I've given you in clear, incontrovertible evidence, everybody sees, based on objective facts, that these factors are absolutely beyond the control of government. Now, there has been discussion about what government can do or cannot do.
In fact, that was
yes.
been the major issue. That, look, in terms of cushioning, this has been going on for about a month now. What's the thinking?
Yes.
Because there's been
So
the direct pointer to this one. This. That you
yes.
should take
So
it
you see, there are two types of taxations. There's direct taxation, which goes directly into the coffers of government. So the part of ESLA that goes to the road fund, for instance, is to help fix our roads. The levy that we introduced was to help address the shortfalls in buying fuel to fire thermal plants, which is critical to keep the lights on. The any sector debt recovery levy is necessary to address some debts that have accrued over the years through our own collective behavior as a country. The special petroleum tax goes directly into government coffers. However, there are levies. Those that I have told you the MPP increased between 300 to 429% between 2018 to 2024. Those ones don't come directly to government. They go to some agencies. So those ones can be looked at. And I'm sure when the finance minister comes to cabinet next week and makes a presentation, some concrete decisions to be taken in that respect to cushion the people of Ghana against those factors that we do not control. But the facts must be reiterated that the force equivalence that is being attempted. I've even heard people say that, this shows how deceitful the NDC were in their politics. There was no deceit. If
you made a lot of politics out of this Russia-Ukraine.
But I've told you, I've actually explained it to you, and I don't mind going over it briefly. In 2015, the price of petrol was 3 cedis 50 pesos, 3 cedis 60 pesos, depending on where you bought it. The MPP flag bearer today, who was then running mate at the time, described the government as insensitive. At the time, we had just introduced ESLA in order that we are able to address the perennial problem of shortfalls in the petroleum. And everybody agrees that since we introduced that, the problems associated with piling debt, which leads to shortages, has completely been resolved. Yet, Dr. Bamiyan criticized us severely when he was in opposition. When you come to power and you pick that same product from 3 cedis 50 pesos to 23 cedis, nobody will give you plaudits. You won't get flowers, bouquets of flowers presented to you. Mere gold and frankincense will not be poured onto you. You will come under scrutiny, especially when the factors are your doing. And I've explained to you, it was the deterioration in the exchange rates between July and November that year, which was government's fault. And the imposition or increases in these levies, which I've highlighted, between 300% to 429%, that accounted for those steep increases. And that is the reason why, even at $86 per barrel in November 2022, we were buying fuel at the pump for 23 cedis. Today, it's $710 per barrel. And we are buying fuel at what? 15 cedis and 17 cedis, which is lower than it. And that is what stabilization of the currency will do. And I've heard people criticize government. Some have faulted the Bank of Ghana for purchasing gold to that extent. Some have even faulted them for rebalancing their portfolio assets so that their reserve portfolio, so that they will have liquidity to be able to support exports or imports that we need to do as a country. So those factors must clearly be defined in order that we have a handle on what is happening. But as for the fact that government will act to cushion consumers at a point, That is almost inevitable, and it is a certainty.
Because the president talked about one of the weapons being removing this one. So if you say there's going to be a
he didn't say that one. I've told you that there are two types of taxes that we put on fuel. There's direct taxation. The energy fund is a direct tax.
Yes.
That goes to government. Special petroleum tax. What do you call it? And the others. But then there are levies. Those levies don't necessarily come to government. They don't come to government chest. They go to manage the sector. And often it stays with the
that's going to be the target.
Now those ones who are, if you add it, you have between 1.5 cedis and 2 cedis. Those levies alone account for between 1.5 to 2 cedis in terms of the price build-up. So there is leeway there for government to look at those levies and do something about it in order that we are able to see some cushioning at the pumps. But of course, the most permanent solution to this would be for the conflict to end quickly, so that then there's no need.
We and some hodoa etimi ekoso e wo chena ne so. Mama ena was say we jemre. That's an so bad in the adumbi edomania. Unya, e besen Asia.